Thanks very much, and can I make it quite clear, I don't do slide presentations. Can I just, first of all, outline what the Select Committee does, what it has been doing in terms of the higher education agenda, and to give it some sort of political context. Then I think perhaps I'd better explain my own personal views in order to give you a little additional context. First of all, the role of a Select Committee is to scrutinise and monitor a government department, to single out particular issues that it thinks it needs to investigate, and then, having singled out those issues, held an inquiry, make recommendations to the government, and the government is obliged to respond, in theory, within 2 months. Sometimes the government agrees with the committee's recommendations and will implement them. Other times it does not. But the fact that it is a public inquiry and the response is public does mean that the government has to give some fairly robust reasons why it is not agreeing with them. Now, as far as I am concerned personally, I'm the Labour chairman of a coalition majority select committee. That means inevitably, whatever my sort of personal and party political views are, in order to have an inquiry and a report that is credible, then it has to be based on a consensus, and the recommendations to be credible have to be agreed by all of them. But to date, that is what we have always managed. In terms of my personal views on issues such as tuition fees, I must make it clear that I have always believed that there is an appropriate balance between the contribution of an undergraduate and the taxpayer. I did support the original Labour government in its introduction of tuition fees, and I refused to sign the NUS petition prior to the last general election opposing any increase in tuition fees. That does not necessarily mean to say that I agree with the scale of the, shall we say, proposed tuition fees introduced by the current government, but it does mean that I have no ideological opposition to them, but obviously see them in the context of their ability to deliver on the wider higher education agenda. In addition, I also make it clear, the opening remarks of the chair there did talk about higher education as a business. I profoundly believe that higher education is absolutely vital to this country. First of all, to deliver the right balance of skill sets needed to meet business demands in what is a rapidly changing, highly technological economy. But secondly, higher education is a major export earner, and given the problems that we've got in boosting our exporting some of our more traditional products, then its potential for helping the British economy at a very difficult time is enormous. And again, I'll assess the government's proposals in the context of that. I think perhaps I should make a third observation. My experience in talking to both the business and the education community is that higher education is perhaps the best long-term investment we can make in terms of underpinning Britain in the global economy. Undoubtedly, it is aspirational foreign students who come to this country, enjoy their educational and cultural experience in this country, take it back, and that often defines their attitude towards business decisions that are taken in subsequent years to the huge advantage of this country. And certainly on my own doorstep in the West Midlands, I know that the attitude of the Tata brothers and their investment in Jaguar Land Rover was not least conditioned by their long association with the country and the education that they enjoyed here. So there is an enormous and perhaps unrecognised long-term dividend that there come from higher education and involving foreign students. To get through to the specifics, my committee examined the higher education proposals in autumn of last year. The white paper came out in June. We held an inquiry in the autumn months. We produced a report in November. The government was supposed to respond within 2 months. I had a request from the Minister to be a little patient in the new year because of the range of proposals and the further deliberation they needed. So I agreed with that. I subsequently, on receiving no response to the government, wrote to the Minister, and he assured me they wanted to delay it because they wanted to basically incorporate their response in legislative proposals in the Queen's Speech. We've now had the Queen's Speech, and of course there are no proposals for a higher education bill. And we will be inviting the Minister to explain his reasons for that in June, in our first June session after the Jubilee recess. I can only speculate as to the reasons for that, but my understanding is that there is, quite frankly, an impasse within government on the proposals, and therefore they've just been kicked into the long grass. But we will obviously tease out the issues when we have a chance to speak to them. Now, if I can go back to the original proposals, huge significance in the white paper of the approach. It is a genuine and real change in direction. First of all, it introduces a market-driven approach, and it has been introduced for financial reasons. The government needed to get a dramatic reduction in education funding, and their way of doing so was to cut the teaching grant and effectively replace it by an increase in tuition fees, because in terms of the public sector books, only the interest that had to be paid on the loans for the tuition fees would be publicly accountable. And it presented, on the one hand, a short-term solution to reducing the public sector deficit, and the long-term, it underpinned a genuine ideological approach to changing the nature of higher education. Coupled with that, I set a whole raft of proposals which basically, having set up a more market-driven approach to strengthen the hand of the consumer, i.e. putting students at the heart of the process, and that would include key information, sets, better careers advice, better advice to higher education, and so on. And it is those that we're still waiting further information. Also, in addition to that, given the government's declared objectives to improve access, a raft of proposals, the National Scholarship Programme, the bursaries, fee waivers, and the widening participation fund. As somebody who represents a constituency with historically very low levels of access to higher education, those are issues that are very close to my heart and close to my everyday experience in the constituency. In addition to the actual financial measures, there was the strengthening of the Office of Fair Access, and in order to ensure that in return for the increase in tuition fees, universities have meaningful attempts to enter into a dialogue with higher education, schools of further education, to ensure that more students from less privileged backgrounds went to university. Now, first of all, we have to be clear that the financial model has gone wrong. And this impacts hugely on, if you like, the further policies that the government has had to introduce, and particularly the access one. The funding was predicated on an assumption that the university tuition fees would average at 7,500 when they came in at over 8,000. And then also politically there was enormous pressure on the government to introduce some mechanism by which people who could afford to could pay off their fees early. Now, given the fact that the original financial model was predicated on the assumption that people would pay interest over a 30-year period, that again completely undermined the original model. And arising from the decisions to actually implement that, it wasn't in the white paper, and of course it hasn't been in any legislation, it has further skewed the financial model on which the whole system is based. And to overcome that, the government has introduced the so-called core and margin provisions, whereby students universities can recruit students with the AAB and AAB plus qualifications to an unlimited extent, and on the other hand, a certain percentage of places would be removed from the initial allocation to go to those universities who were charging under the 7,500 fee level, as a mechanism for driving down fee levels and actually trying to make the financial model work. And what are the likely consequences of that? Well, I see it as being a further reinforcement, if you like, of the already class-based or the position of the middle classes, sharp-elbowed middle classes, to get their children into the so-called elite universities, because it is they that will have an increase in their numbers. It will be the other universities that are disadvantaged and may well have to, shall we say, take the non-AAB students. I think also there is likely to be, because students from less traditionally aspirational backgrounds and lower income, they are more likely to go to their local university where there's a possibility of cheaper home accommodation and so on and so forth. And so I do see a problem that already existed in terms of the high number of students from the private sector, selective schools and higher income backgrounds going to the so-called Russell Group universities, and those from state schools and less privileged areas going to the other universities. I see that as being reinforced by this financial model. I want to take time for questions, so I'll just go through the situation as we see it emerging at the moment. If you look at the UCAS figures, overall, arising from the increase in tuition fees, there has been an 8.7% drop in student applications. Notwithstanding that, of course, there's been 10,000 fewer places in university this year, but it is still heavily oversubscribed, something like 50,000. So, notwithstanding that drop in applications, there is still more students chasing university places than there are available. It also masks some variations within, some of them quite surprising. there are fewer males applying than females, a bigger drop in males applying. The numbers coming from the EU have dropped by 7.4%, but non-EU members have risen by nearly 14%. Interesting and most significant of all in terms of the debate on accessibility, the students from lower income families, there's only been a 0.2% reduction, whereas there's been a 2.5% reduction in those coming from the wealthier families. I've been trying to assess what the implications of that are. My own feeling is because, well, first of all the evidence that seemed to emerge from my committee inquiry was that tuition fees was less of an issue with lower income students than accommodation grants and so on and so forth, because tuition fees obviously are not an upfront payment, and I think that seems to be reflected by the figures. But secondly, I believe that young people from lower income backgrounds and areas come probably from areas where there's less alternative job prospects and so on than those who are from more affluent areas. But until we've had time to really drill down into the social trends that lie behind those application figures, then it's very difficult to say indeed. The other has been the impact on courses, significant drops in creative arts, design, architecture, language and communications. Much less of a drop, a modest drop in medicine, law and engineering. That does seem to reflect the way that money has been allocated in terms of the teaching grant and the government priorities. My concern is, of course, that the idea that it's only people who do science-based degrees who go into business and help to generate wealth for the economy, that is just not true at all. Our creative arts are huge income earners for this country, and by and large the people who, if you like, generate that income come with non-STEM academic qualifications. But we have yet to see how the full impact of the changes which have taken place, and obviously my committee will be doing, if you like, a post higher education white paper monitoring exercise next year to go through with the Minister and interested bodies exactly what has been the impact and fallout of the changes that have taken place so far. Now, I'm here to learn from you as much as to tell you anything. I recognise that there are within the attendance today people with a lot of expertise and qualifications in areas, and that expertise I would like to, if you like, try and take on board so that I can feed it through the select committee process when we talk to the ministers and other interested bodies in the very near future. So if I've got time to take a few questions,
yes,
I'd like to do so.
Yes. Well, now's your chance, folks. Just before we open up, can I just go back to Peter's question earlier about, we're still talking about traditional students coming through at 18 from school. Are you able to say anything about part-time and mature students in your deliberations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can. And could I make it clear in my figures that one of the most worrying aspects of the outcome of the current tuition fee regimes does seem to be a significant drop in our mature students. Again, we need closer examination to assess exactly what the reason for that is, why that should be disproportionately greater than in other areas. years, but it would, I suspect, be, given the financial pressures that people are under as adults, then the prospect of taking on extra loans to, shall we say, underpin education advancement, particularly if they're already in a job and got a reasonably secure income. And it may well be at a time in their life when they got young families, mortgages and so on and so forth, were additional pressures. So I think that's an area that we need to examine very closely to see how, if possible, we can fine-tune the financial support regime to overcome this particular problem.
Okay, more to do there, I suspect. Now, indicate either responses to what Adrian has said or your own ideas, views, opinions in order to flavour the Select Committee's further deliberations. Any takers? Just tell us your name and where you're from, please. Thank you.
My name's Tracy Taylor. I'm at Brighton University Business School. You talked about UCAS earlier on. I wondered whether you had considered non-traditional students in terms of non-A-level student entry, and in particular the BTEC qualification. Because the Higher Education Authority have a risk table where they showed quite clearly that all BTEC students are high-risk university candidates in that they often fail the first year. And many universities have actually closed the door to BTEC students by stealth, by adding an additional hurdle to them. Have you looked at that at all?
No, I haven't. I think as a result of what you said, I might well do so. That sounds very interesting, and would welcome any brief you'd like to give me on it, because I suppose you've got to go back. This is the most profound change in the delivery of higher education that we've had well, since the war. It was financially driven. The full impact and consequences of the financial changes, I don't think the government understood, and that's the reason why we haven't had a bill on this. We are only just beginning to get some sort of grasp on exactly what is going to happen. And it's things like this that we need to pick up and feed into the policy assessment process with recommendations for the government to make, take measures on it. I honestly don't believe the government really knows where it's going with education. Quite frankly, all it had was a financial situation that it had to address, and everything so far has been based on that. Having thrown education up in the air, they're not sure where the pieces are going to fall yet. But that does give my committee a particular responsibility for assessing exactly where it's fallen and what the government needs to do to make sure that we've got something that comes out which is going to deliver.
Okay, so 3 questions. Okay, lady in the lilac jacket, please.
Thank you. And my question links to the previous one. I'm Anna Lemon, and I'm the General Manager of the Institute of Administrative Management, which is a professional body that's been around since the First World War. And like other professional bodies, we have qualifications, professional qualifications, which are very tightly quality assured. And actually they are not considered as risks by universities. And our students very often at several levels don't have to jump through extra hoops to get to the universities, for example, from our level 4 to their level second year courses. Despite this fact, our students and professional body students in general do not gain for their qualifications automatically UCAS points. And we've been lobbying for professional bodies for gaining UCAS point for our students, and despite that, we are absolutely getting nowhere with that. Do you have a view on that?
Sorry, I didn't catch your last one.
Whether you have a view on this whole issue of professional bodies which are providing high-level high standard professional qualifications, not gaining UCAS points for their students.
Yeah. I can see changes taking place which basically challenge the historic assumption that the best route to higher education is via university, and that obviously has implications for universities and their provision. And indeed, I do think to a certain extent the regime that's being implemented is designed in part to encourage people to take alternative routes to achieving certain either vocational or professional qualifications. And I think arising from that, you will find that young people will be more inclined to take a non-university route or to take, I can remember the days of sandwich courses and so on, where, if you like, their education is closely allied to a business, and certainly in terms of what you've been talking about, I think there's a strong possibility that a large number of students will start to look at such routes. The issue arises is what is the level of financial support they will get from the government, and how will the government incorporate alternative routes to professional qualifications in their funding regime. And I don't believe we have a clear picture on that yet. But again, any suggestions we have will be received and incorporated into our deliberations.
So I think the messages from both points are that we need to think a bit more sharply about changing markets in terms of student profile, but also in parity across different routes. Otherwise, we are back to where we were in 1976, as we said at the beginning of the morning. Right at the back, I think, was a question. There was somebody here in the front. There we go. Okay, Susan. So can we take the question at the back first, and then we'll come to Susan here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Angela Dean. I'm Head of School of Technology at the University of Derby. I'm also on the Regional Council for SEPTA, which is a Sector Skills Council for Engineering and Manufacturing. My question is about what government thinks about the loan system for part-time students. And I think their policy may give them perverse behaviour. What I've found is that the government's very committed to the higher apprenticeship in engineering, and the qualification in that in terms of higher education is either an HNC or a foundation degree, which probably will be delivered at a local college for the employers. In talking to employers through a number of sources, I found that they're very unwilling for students to progress to a degree programme with the university using the loan system, and they want to control the education of their workforce by sponsoring them, but they're unwilling to sponsor at the new rates of fees in universities. Do you think this is going to give a ceiling where students won't progress to degrees from higher apprenticeships?
Good question.
Yeah, it is a very good question, and the first time I think I've had that issue spelled out in that way. I mean, certainly we've had evidence of resistance of shall we say, people taking this course because of the loan system, and I think historically there's been a very low level of graduation, if you like, from apprenticeship to a higher apprenticeship into university degrees, and this particular the loan regime may well add to that problem. Certainly, I think more and more employers are recognising that if they're going to get their employees up to an advanced level qualification, they are going to have to put the investment in themselves. Some are prepared to do it and others aren't. What concerns me is that the problems we already have with getting suitably qualified people into small and medium-sized enterprises is going to be reinforced by this regime, because it is the small businesses that are less able to provide the investment that your Rolls Royces and so on can do so. So yes, there's an existing problem. I think that the loan system for mature students certainly won't address it. It might make it worse. And if we are serious about developing higher skills in engineering particularly, but in other businesses as well, we have to look at, shall we say, some sort of package where the state and employers can come to something that will actually deliver on what is needed.
Thank you. Very good question. We will talk more about the sector skills councils this afternoon. Final question, Susan. I think it was you.
Yes. One of the measures in the white paper you haven't alluded to, which is the potential for degree awarding power to be extended to organisations that weren't involved in high level teaching. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about where that might be going, or whether it's likely to come to pass when the legislation eventually gets into the Queen's speech.
Sorry, I just missed part of your question. Did you just repeat it?
It's in the white paper. It mentioned that they were thinking of extending degree awarding powers to institutions other than those currently involved in teaching at higher education.
You're talking about FE colleges and so on.
And other organisations like awarding bodies, yes.
It throws up a whole range of opportunities, but it also throws up problems as well. I do think that given the funding regime and the additional cost of accommodation and so on for young people, that there will be a move, particularly in areas such as mine, to actually get your higher education qualification from, shall we say, as close by as you can. And there are all sorts of, in addition to financial, there's sometimes cultural drivers for that as well. That obviously has implications on the universities and their accreditation process and so on and so forth. And certainly in some areas, if you could have a separate standalone institution delivering them, could be a challenge to the existing, if you like, higher education structure in the area. I think whether it's welcome or not, this sort of thing is going to happen. I think higher education is going to change, and existing higher education institutes are going to have to recognise that whether they like it or not, change is going to take, and they must adapt their models to deliver to do so. Because I do see under the existing system there is going to be a very strong driver for young people in particular, but also mature students, to take more qualifications at as locally based provider as they can. And if a higher education institute hasn't got the structure to deliver on that, then they need to get it.
Thank you very much. We need to stop it there, but I